Marlene.
Hi, good morning, Marissa.
Thank you so much for making time to connect with Nation Builder, to be part of our collab nationally. And we're so grateful to get to hear your voice and your perspective in terms of leadership in this collab.
Oh, no, firstly, it's a privilege to be part of the collab. And then secondly, a privilege to be part of such an important conversation. I've been shaped by leaders that were ahead of the road for me. So it's great to be contributing from that perspective.
So excited. So first and foremost, a formal introduction, Marlene Coetzee-George, the CEO of Laureus Sport for Good Foundation in South Africa. And you've been part of the journey actually when Laureus launched in South Africa in 2002, and South Africa was one of the first chapters that Laureus launched globally. So therefore, your journey has been one from the start and obviously has gone through a few changes. And then in 2020, you were offered the opportunity to be the acting CEO, where you officially accepted the role of CEO in July 2021. So tell us about that journey.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to use the word blessed because I considered a journey that was just laden with blessing and opportunity, challenges as well, but I'm going to focus on the blessings and the opportunity. So at the time when Laureus was established in South Africa, the German foundation was the first one to be registered, but I think the South African foundation was the first one to gain traction with supporting programs on the ground. And so at the time that it was established, I was part of a management company here in South Africa that was led by Morne du Plessis, and part of what his company looked at was sports establishment and sports-led establishments, of which Laureus then just neatly kind of fell underneath. At that time, he was the co-founder of the Sports Science Institute. And so our early days, our office space was held at the Sports Science Institute and kind of had the covering and support of that governance structure as a newly established trust in South Africa. And so that's where it started in 2002 for me.
Our topic and our theme for this year's collab is actually on leadership, and we specifically are speaking into multi-generational leadership. So what does foresight, succession, and also planning for the future of Africa look like in the social impact space? So for us, it's very strategic that we have you speak, obviously, as your journey with Laureus, but also on how does that experience look like for leaders?
Yes.
Whether you are a leader that established organization, leaders that are emerging, leaders that are guiding key strategic areas where it comes to fostering inclusive leadership practices.
Yes.
So my first question to you, Marlene, is around sustainable growth. As you mentioned, you've been with Laureus from the beginning when they planted in South Africa. And what does sustainable growth mean when we're building leaders and when we're building resilient leadership across the generations? And how did it look, especially when you were part of those journeys for Laureus?
Yes. I think it's important for me to note that when I started in 2002, I didn't consider myself a leader. At that stage, I was a project manager. While I was kind of leading the foundation, in my mind, I wasn't a leader. I was managing a project, and I had a leader who was the chairman, right? And so I think one of the critical things upon reflection now is that maybe the person who's destined for leadership right now isn't necessarily seeing themselves as a leader. They are just doing a good job of what they have been entrusted at this point. And so it's important, I think, that the person ahead of the one currently looking after things maybe at a more junior level, or who would be considered part of the upcoming generation or the emerging generation, that the person ahead of that journey identifies the potential for leadership lower down. Because it might not necessarily be in your mindset at that point in time, you know. But someone ahead of you on the journey kind of needs to recognize that. And I think that is what counted in my favor. I didn't see myself as a leader. I was very eager to learn, but someone else actually identified that at the time when I started already, and was quite intentional about making sure that the way one thinks, even the way you carry yourself, the way you speak in certain settings, that all of those small nuances that you can't necessarily learn, from textbooks. You have to learn it from people. Yeah. You have to learn it from the ones who have actually perfected it already, or is on the journey of just kind of improving, within those aspects. You need those people to kind of teach you and show you. So I think that's an important element. It's the element of leaders who have landed in a space where they are successful and are doing well, to be able to spot talent and to affirm that talent, and then to be able to, where they can, influence pathways for that talent to grow. And especially if you are in the position where you are the founder, I think you've got the freedom of opportunity to make that happen. If you kind of, wrap your head around that proactively, and not allow it to become a reactive situation where it's too far down the line. Whereas I think I was a beneficiary of thought leadership, where that was in place quite early on.
I love what you said about you didn't see yourself as a leader, but your leader identified that leadership quality in you. And also when you spoke about emerging leaders to actually be nurtured. And what I hear you also say is about modeling leadership also for emerging young talent.
Yes.
And also in your recruitment process, what are you looking for when you are looking for people to lead, like you say, departments or projects, and that might not have a title of leadership, but actually seeking those opportunities for your team.
Yes.
So my next question is specifically around succession planning that protects vision for the long term, because obviously Laureus is global, then they're coming to South Africa, and then there are a few different changes, and even the complexity of navigating global pandemic, funding structures, and shifts with international funding models. So for you, why is it essential, just beyond the roles, or like the role of the CEO, why is it essential that you build those practical models in the planning, in your structures, and in your teams for creating the long-term impact?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that succession is something that's going to be influenced at the highest level of governance. And so that conversation can become a complicated conversation, or it can become a conversation that is part of how you deal with matters arising on your board when it's not contentious, right? And so I think it is important to note where you are as a board or as an organization in the life cycle of the organization, and where the current leadership is in terms of their tenure. And at least create some awareness around what the future looks like 4 years prior to where it's going to become a critical situation, to start having those conversations. In my mind, I think at least 4 years, it might sound like a long time.
Yeah.
The reason why 4 years for me sounds about right. The first year, nothing's going to happen except conversation, And so when I think of succession, time is probably the biggest and most valued gift you can give yourself. Number one, for the person who might be, finding this position as something that they've treasured, especially if it's a founder, to give that person the gift of time. And then also to allow someone that might show the potential for talent to step into, to give that person the gift of time to prepare the thinking, all of the things that you need to have in place understanding what the values are and ensuring that there's values alignment. If you have the benefit of time, you can craft it. You can structure a process that is beneficial for the person coming up and that is thoughtful for the person who has to step out. So I think in terms of if we just speak about the not-for-profit world in general, we are always looking for money to survive. We are the things that we focus on is the things that we need to help our organizations to thrive. And so this isn't necessarily, there's something that's going to be front of mind. And so one has to weave it in at a time when it's not contentious and when you do your strategy. When we do our strategy, we always have a forward view of at least 3 to 5 years. And that's the time when you actually at the start of the 3 to 5 years, where you build this into the thinking and into the conversation so that the closer you come to the finish line, you've actually had quite a long path of conversation, of consultation, of an opportunity to share ideas and to see what would work best within that setting.
I love that. I'm taking the gift of time as part of your planning, part of your strategy, part of your vision casting for your team. Our last question is really around inclusive leadership practices and models.
Yes.
And I know we've spoken a little bit about how that looks different for different organizations, different entities. We've spoken a little bit about values-based leadership. But Marlene, in your experience, inclusive leadership thrives in role clarity. How have you built models within the Laureus structures? How have you built practices within your leadership systems and structures? Whether at the top, in the middle. Tell us more about building more inclusive leadership models within your organization.
Yeah, thanks. So we have always had a practice that the CEO is only as successful and as strong as the people that flanks the CEO to the left and to the right. And so that's not only in terms of leading the staff in projects, but that's also in terms of the conversations that's held at board level. And so one of the practices that we have is that when we have our board meetings, the whole management team goes into the board meeting, and not just as observers, as participants. While you can't vote, whatever it is that you are anchoring from a strategic point of view, you report directly to the board on that. So the CEO is there. I remember having a conversation like this, in a setting with other organizations, and one of the questions they asked is does that not demonize the CEO's voice? When you have all of these other people speaking and holding topics that you should be holding on your own. And I guess that could be a lens, right? But the challenge is if you do not make that narrative and that level of conversation broader, your options when it comes to the point of succession are limited, right? And so part of the reason why I think it was an easy transition for me to get into the CEO role is because I always had a voice around the table as a project manager, as a emerging leader, and then ultimately as a leader. It's it's not impossible, but I think it's more challenging to find your voice if you didn't have a voice around that table in the first place. And so while you're not making the decisions, you can contribute, and you can learn. I mean, so much of my learning has come from listening to people ahead of the path. It's just been listening. It's just been observing. You learn so much. And so we have been quite intentional. So the whole management team goes in. And then there are also times when we've achieved something significant and it is someone at a junior level of management, I ask permission for the board for that person to be celebrated so that person can come in just for that section to present. This is what they've done. And it's quite intimidating because it's not a space that that person's familiar with, but that's also the first introduction. Sometimes, when you speak to staff, the board is there. It's almost like, we are here, they are there, and there's all of these layers between us and the board. And so just that one opportunity to come into a boardroom and to speak about something that you are passionate about, and you've got now have the proof of evidence and you've influenced the outcome, to be able to speak about that to the people who's considered the decision makers, it just narrows the gap. It makes it more attainable. If you are not even an emerging leader, you are emerging leader. And now you're speaking to, the decision makers. It brings you closer. Even just in your mind, it brings you closer. Actually, I've done this. I've done this once. Maybe this is something that I can excel in. I've had a little bit of a taste. I didn't die. So we are quite intentional about that, about the management team growing alongside the CEO, about the management team being rewarded alongside the CEO. And so I've benefited from that. And so I guess if you feel intimidated and if you feel like, you're losing some of your shine, it's not necessarily going to be your thing, But I feel if you have people shining next to you, you're creating more of a glow, as opposed to trying to hold on to that on your own.
Wow.
Yeah.
So profound about also shining with your team. And I loved how you described it to the left and to the right, because often we see the hierarchy and the structure. And as you mentioned about a team member coming in and feeling like, the board is so far from where they are in where they work or how they're thinking. I also want to say, with regards to creating that opportunities, I see that you as a leader obviously had that experience, and you also creating other pathways, like you mentioned, pathways for opportunity, even celebrating wins. Last week, Friday, we were at Iniatelo for World NGO Day, and Prof. Eric Atmore actually spoke about how are you modeling leadership? And I posed the question to him, how do you address founder syndrome or hoarding knowledge? And he literally spoke that he chose to be at World NGO Day, and he sent his team to do important grant or fund or stakeholder meetings because he felt that his value was needed to speak to the sector.
Yeah.
And he treasured that he could send his trusted team to go and do the work on his behalf. So I hear what you're saying around modeling that and allowing for opportunities where you're bringing your team alongside you to meetings or to the board.
And when you're not in meetings, you have to build the trust tank. You're right. You have to spend time to just talk. I don't want to use the word nonsense because it's not nonsense, but it's just talk when it's not curated by an agenda. But just speak, get to know each other, When I was at the Sports Science Institute, I was in a GM role there. And one of the things, because there were so many more people there that I was responsible for, but one of the things that I was passionate about was knowing your name and what's your husband's name, what's your children's name, what are they doing, what grade are they in. And those conversations build so much trust, right? That you then get reports. Here's my child's report card, here's this. And I realized that sometimes, leaders just need to show interest in the person, and the quality of delivery will sort itself out. People just want to be seen, right? And so how much more in the NGO space when we do hard work, we focus on the kids and the beneficiaries that we invest. Sorry, I get very passionate about this. That the funding flows to, and our colleagues are raising kids with special needs, and we don't know about it. But we are sorting out the needs of the child where the funding is flowing through.
Yeah.
And so, what does trust look in our industry? Trust looks like knowing who the people are that you're leading, not just when they're around the table, but when they sit around the dinner table tonight. Do you know who they're having dinner with? Do you know that person's wife and husband's name? That's where trust starts, right? And then that cascades into how trust plays out in the office, in the relationships. And then when you have the conversation of succession with Marlene, and you know my husband, you know my children, you are thoughtful about that because it's not just about her. She was actually here, and she was fending for a family. She was providing for a family. And so there's that element of thoughtfulness that goes with trust because you've worked on that throughout the journey. It's not something that comes like that when all of a sudden now we're talking succession. It's weaved into your values and how you lead your people and your people's people, right?
Yeah.
And that makes, I think it's those elements that then makes the process like just a little bit more not that it's inhumane, but a little bit more human and thoughtful, because you're also looking at that person who has to step out.
Yeah. You're leading the whole person.
Yes, yes.
Any final words of wisdom for us?
Sure. I think we are in the best industry. We are doing amazing work. We are counting hearts before we are counting money. And so I think just let the heart and let purpose lead all the time. And I said at one point, if you do good work, and if the work comes from the heart, and if it's intentional and it will bring about the change on the ground that you want to see, then the money will follow. And someone said to me, "Oh, that's very naive." And I went and thought about it, what would happen if the money leads? And I thought, I think it's better if the heart leads, if purpose leads, and the right partners will recognize that, and the right funds will follow.
Thank you so much. Wishing you and your team all of the best.
Thank you so much.